Welcome to the Talent Development Hot Seat. I'm your host, Andy Storch, and I'm excited that you're joining me today for another great episode and conversation to help you up your game and improve your capabilities in the world of talent development. And today we are talking all about leadership and specifically the bad or worst things that you can do in leadership, as well as what we can learn from those to help our leaders become better in growing their people in the workplace. My guest today is Mita Mallick, who is a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author, workplace culture strategist, and passionate advocate for fixing what's broken in today's workplaces. She's been named to the Thinkers 50 radar list and draws from her extensive experience as former global head of inclusion and culture at Carta and her leadership roles at Unilever, Pfizer, and Avon. Mita is a prolific contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Adweek, and Entrepreneur. In her first book, Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transforming Your Workplace, established her as a leading voice in workplace transformation. Today, we'll be discussing her newest book called The Devil Emails at Midnight: What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses, which offers invaluable insights on leadership through examining examples. Mita is a graduate of Columbia University and Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and brings both academic credentials and real-world experience to her mission of creating more inclusive and effective workplaces. Mita, welcome back to the show.
Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm back again. I'm very excited.
Back again. I forgot to mention in my intro as well. Of course, you joined us in the past when you published your first book. That was episode 426 on reimagining inclusion, debunking 13 myths to transform your workplace in September of 2023. So just about 2 years ago. And you've got a new book coming out now, which is really
Lucky
exciting.
426. Lucky 426. I won't forget that number.
426. So I'm really excited about this. I've loved following you over the years and all the stuff you've been creating on LinkedIn. And I'm curious about your personal journey. I know you shared a little bit with us in the past, but how has your journey and your early experiences really shaped your passion for the work that you do and what's led up to this book?
Well, I will evoke Marvel and the origin story, which is what is my origin story, which is, as you know, we've talked about this before, but I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the United States outside of Boston. And I always say I grew up in a time and a place where it was not cool to be Indian. And I think many people can resonate with that feeling, no matter what community or however you identify or wherever you feel like you belong. And I was the funny looking, dark skinned girl with the long, funny looking braid whose, parents spoke funny English and it wasn't funny anymore. And I was bullied a lot, both verbally and physically by my peers. They made me know every single day I did not belong in that community. And I had, my younger brother and my parents always had this unwavering faith about what I was going to do with my life and just this unbelievable confidence in me, even when I didn't have it. And so I always draw on that strength. But, I never expected, Andy, that the bullies from the schoolyards and classrooms would follow me into the halls of corporate America and the conference rooms that these people grew up and that they were still here. And for me, wherever you are in the world listening to our conversation, I think everyone can draw on that feeling that they don't belong, whether it's they weren't invited to a birthday party, they didn't make it to a sports team, they were excluded from a team meeting, they didn't get invited to a friend's wedding or supposed friend's wedding, like all these moments. And it's just a really horrible feeling. And I think exclusion is a really powerful force. And so that has really driven me my entire life, particularly as we think about the workplace.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's unfortunate that so many kids and people go through experiences like that. And I've had some of my own, and certainly didn't grow up with maybe as many disadvantages. But at the same time, I've had those experiences, seen those experiences, and you kind of, when you hear about it with kids, unfortunate, but you're like, okay, kids are kids, and they do those things. Maybe they don't know any better. But like you said, for it to follow you into the workplace and have adults still treating people poorly or mistreating people. And I would imagine that's what prompted you to write this book, The Devil Emails at Midnight. So I wonder if you could tell us more about the impetus for the book and how you came up with this and the title especially.
Sure. So it was a few years ago, my mother's home was flooded and badly destroyed. It's rebuilt now. I'm actually sitting in my home, in her home, talking to you in our conversation today. And when I was in this soaked home trying to help her save things a few years ago, I was in my childhood bedroom. And anyone who's had a childhood bedroom that parents have preserved, it had my, spelling bee certificate from like the third grade. It had writings. It had, it was the proud editor-in-chief of the fifth grade elementary school newspaper, all these things we hold on to. And I found, Andy, a notebook from my 20s. And I love a good notebook still to this day. And I had written down a list of bad bosses I had had. I had nicknamed them. I had little paragraphs for them. I had things that they had said and done to me. Like, how interesting that in my 20s, I'd written this all down. And I had this moment, for anyone who's watched Mean Girls, that burn book. And I thought to myself, what if I'm actually listed in someone else's book? And that notebook actually reminded me, I've written a lot. If you followed my writing, I write about how to survive a toxic workplace, how to survive a bad boss. That's the number one DM I get. Usually someone has something really painful they're going through at work, and they're asking for advice on how they can try to survive, endure, or what they should do next. And I thought to myself, well, why is it that we're coaching everyone else on it? Why are we not coaching the people who are in positions of power, which has been you and me at times in our career, to think about, look in the mirror, and how are our behaviors negatively impacting the workplace and not allowing people to do their best work?
I wish I had been keeping a notebook in my 20s as well. I'm a very avid journaler now. Started in my 30s, but I wish I had in my 20s, because I also had some really bad bosses in my 20s as well. People who were just complete jerks, who would, yell at us and just treat us really poorly. And I've been through some of those experiences. As I've gone through and studied leadership over the years, and being we'll say an optimist, maybe a naive optimist myself, I like to think that while there are a lot of bad bosses out there, most of them don't set out to be that way. They just don't realize how they're impacting people. Do you agree with that? Or what's your perspective on that as you've gone through these experiences and talked to others about it?
I completely agree with you. I talk about in The Devil Emails at Midnight, bad bosses aren't born, they're made. We're a product of our circumstances and life experiences. And over the years, just as I've had for childhood bullies, for bully bosses, for bad bosses, I have empathy in a way I didn't. And I think about how all of us can be hurt, misdirected human beings who happen to be in positions of power. And so that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it gives me a different insight into this idea that hurt people hurt people. And so why do people behave this way in the workplace? And so I have a different level of empathy than I would have had. I even 2 years ago when we had our conversation, right? I have a different level of empathy as I've been working on this book and thinking about some of the experiences I've had. And listen, I've been a bad boss, and chances are so have you. That is the premise of the book, is that we all can be a bad boss. And so how do we stop ourselves from behaving this way?
Right. Yeah. Can you share some examples of particularly challenging situations that you've been through, or some stories from the book that people can learn from?
Sure. I have 13 archetypes I go through. I'm actually the last one, so I include myself. I've nicknamed all of them. I hope all these people are good leaders now. I should also say, someone who's a bad boss for me may be a good boss for you. It's all about context and situation. It's really interesting. But I nickname them all, because part of the interesting thing is when you nickname a bad boss, you're trying to create emotional distance, because I could never be as bad as they are, could I? Right. And so one of the, I think, out of the 13, 3 of them really impacted my mental health. I would say one of them to this day that I still puzzle around is Medusa. And when I entered the workforce, when I started working on her team, there was nobody in my life, not my parents, not my brother, not my husband, not my friends, certainly. No one had ever screamed at me. No one ever had shouted and yelled at me. And here I am working on this person's team, shouting, yelling, throwing pens, publicly humiliating, privately humiliating. And this was the type of bad boss bully. And some bullies are really good at isolating. Oh no, she was an equal opportunist. She went after everybody, right? She went after everyone ruthlessly. And this was also the boss that threw a Chanel shoe at my colleague. And it's funny, I've actually had buried this memory over the years. And this is a testament to my husband, who listens to all my stories and said, don't you remember this? Because sometimes you go through these traumatic things, you try to push them away.
Put them out of our mind. Yeah.
And I just don't understand, Andy, how even, and I know people listening to our conversation now, this is still happening somewhere in the world. Like, this behavior is still tolerated. And this idea that we think fear-based leadership drives results has to be canceled. Now, I will say that in this moment working for her, I showed up to work the first few months scared every single day. And
Mhm.
because I was so scared, I worked so hard because
Yeah.
I thought to myself, if I work hard enough, she's gonna leave me alone, which was not the case. She always found something
Mm.
to, lose her mind
But
over.
it does get results in the short term.
It does. But then what happens is, right, and then the next part is I start to get tired. Who wants to
Mm.
come to work scared every day?
Right.
And then
Yeah.
you're like, this is tiring. Doesn't matter what I do. I'm just going to try to go under the radar.
Mhm.
I don't really give a crap about my job anymore.
Right.
All the ways that we start to get disengaged and then it leads to burnout.
Yeah. It's like we said, it may work in the short term, but it certainly doesn't in the long term. You lose employees, they lose their mental
Yes.
health, all kinds of
Yes. Yes.
the consequences. And I would imagine that that boss, that Medusa, they're acting that way for one reason or another, having to do with their own background and the way they've been
Sure.
treating and their own fear. And they're probably not in a healthy state of mind. Do you talk about or think about what drives some of these actions? And
Sure.
if a leader, a manager reads this book or recognizes some of these archetypes and even recognizes themselves in some of these situations, what can they do about that to change things?
Yeah. I mean, in her case, I think there was deep insecurity, there was
Hmm.
deep hurt. I know this will resonate with you. It's that too often we mandate executive coaching. We don't need to weaponize executive coaching. People need therapy. Like
Yeah.
she needed therapy.
Yeah.
And so why do people behave this way? And when I think about bad boss behaviors, now people listening will be like, "Oh, Medusa's an extreme archetype," right? And in
Mhm.
many ways she is. But here's the thing: some of us have allowed a Medusa to exist. You might not be the Medusa, but you might have someone on your team working for you who behaves like that, or a peer, and
Mhm.
somehow it's the worst kept secret in the organization. I
Mhm.
find that bad boss behaviors generally come, under three situations. One is that there's something happening in the external market. I'm sitting in the US right now, lots of continued discussion around tariffs. I know there's
Mhm.
global impacts to that. Your
Yeah.
competitors come out with an innovation that outpaces yours. There's an
Yeah.
M&A that's failed. There's something externally that's agitating the system and creating stress, bad boss behavior. Number two, your boss is a bad boss. And we say in my house, poo poo trickles down, right? So then all of a sudden, if I work for you and you're the bad boss, I start to absorb some of that behavior.
Yeah.
And then number three, it's really something personal that's happened that you are bringing in with you to work. You've
Mhm.
lost a loved one, miscarriage, breakup, divorce, someone sick, you're
Mhm.
sick, something happening with the kids, a big move, all of these things, all these stresses and grief that we might try to bury. But as I talk about with the loss of my own father in the book, that you can bury grief and it unexpectedly will show up and there will be an explosion,
Mm.
right? And so those
Yeah.
are some of the ways in which we have to watch for when those tendencies can show up in us.
Yeah. It's a good point there. Some people are they're operating that way on a regular basis, like Medusa, but others, it might be lurking below the surface and
Yes.
gets triggered by certain events, whether it be in the company or the industry or the world, or something that's personal happening in their life. You mentioned grief and going through your own experience with that. That's something that affects just about everybody at
Sure.
some point in their lives. What did you learn about going through the grief process that could be helpful for others?
I lost my dad suddenly in 2017 with one phone
Mm.
call from my mom. It changed my life. I'm actually talking to you from what was my dad's old study, which is really special. But I would say that, I showed up back to work and a few things happened. I remember my boss at the time said to me, "Oh, finally, you got your mojo back." That was like a week or 2 weeks after I came back because no one
Wow.
wanted to see a sad Mita. People wanted
Mm.
to see me smiling and pretending everything was okay. Not everyone, but a number of people at work, and it was like I had gotten the flu and I got over it. And so I
Mhm.
think, as a society, certainly in our workplaces, we don't talk enough about grief. We don't actually have bereavement leave policies that are generous enough to allow people
Mhm.
the time to grieve. And for me, I include this as the last archetype in the devil emails at midnight because all these bad bosses I disliked over the years. I became the micromanager. I
Mhm.
became someone who was disengaged. I was gone for days. My team would wonder where I was. I would lose my temper at people. This is not something I normally do, but these are the
Mm.
things that happen, especially when your world is shaken and all of a sudden you feel this loss of control personally.
Mhm.
Where's the best way and easiest way to get control is get it at work if you have a team. You could try to control them, right? And I know many of us can remember that feeling in the pandemic and how loss of control, where do you look for control? And so giving yourself time to grieve. And I think this is an example of where vulnerability is so important. I wish I could have gone back and told my team that I missed my dad, I was grieving, which are all perfectly normal things to be going through.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
didn't really talk about that. And if I had said, hey, I'm taking this day off because I just need a day to go grieve him,
Yeah.
or it's Father's Day
Right.
is coming up, or his birthday is coming up. And I hope more of
Yeah.
us can do that.
Right. It just be open about the fact that, hey, I'm still processing this. I'm having a hard time with this.
Yes.
I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling upset. This day is coming up. It reminds me of him. I just need to take some time off and I'll be back. And, I'm committed to the team, but I've got these things going on in my personal life. And as a team, in theory, we should be able to support each other when we're going through hard times, but that's not always the way. And especially one of the perspectives I've gained in moving to Europe is that sort of the US work-centric culture. Not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's work, work, work all the time. And it's like, don't take time off unless it's absolutely necessary, and make sure your phone is on and
Right.
you're emailing. And
You're
hey,
really
where are
not
you?
taking time off.
Right. Exactly.
Checking in.
There's the old cliche of like, yeah, I'll be out for, tomorrow for major surgery, but don't worry, I'll be checking my
Oh
email
my
all the way
God.
through until
Terrible.
they put me out at the very end. Right. I'm curious, you mentioned one of the most common DMs you get on LinkedIn or other places from people who are dealing with a really toxic or bad boss, maybe an abusive boss like a Medusa. What do you tell those people? What can you do when you are, for lack of a better word, the victim or the employee in that moment dealing with that situation?
I personally had to come to the realization, the reckoning that I alone cannot change a toxic workplace. I alone can't change someone else's behavior. And as
Yeah.
the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, my parents gave me an incredible work ethic, right? And like sometimes I worked very hard and not very smart. And these are things you can't outwork. You can't outwork the bully boss, but boy, did I sure try to. So I think number one, I would recommend documenting things, especially if you're in a gaslighting situation, just to see like what are patterns that are emerging of things that you have so you can clearly be looking at them. I love writing things down. That's how I process it.
Mhm.
I think number two is come up with the exit strategy, exit plan. So oftentimes when we're in this situation, I have the downward spiral, and then you don't find you have the energy to actually get out. Start crafting the plan. I'm not saying to resign tomorrow. You actually might be
Right.
able to move internally onto another team, but start thinking about what you want to do next, and then put an expiration date. Particularly if, let's say, I talk about the chopper and the devil emails at midnight, a notorious micromanager, right? Not the level of Medusa, but in that situation, you might say, I can do this for 8 months. I can do this for 6 months. And when I say I'm going to do it for 6 to 8 months, I'm going to envision what bullets I'm going to put on my resume. I might actually write those bullets down. Like, this is why I'm staying, because I'm going to try to achieve this in this moment, in this work. And then to start networking and reaching out to trusted colleagues. Be careful who you talk to about this at work. But,
Right.
externally, what else can you be doing? And then the final piece of advice I always give people is that in these situations, we often find that we're losing pieces of ourselves, our confidence is shaken. Find something outside of work that sparks joy for you. This could be a childhood hobby you're revisiting. It could be something as an adult you wish you spent more time doing. It could be volunteering in your local community. Just find ways to help rebuild your confidence, because that's going to be so important as you try to figure out what you want to do next.
Yeah. So don't necessarily run right away, but start to get strategic and be thoughtful about, okay, what can I gain from this experience? How can I make the best of it if it's not something I can change?
Sure.
And when am I going to be making a move to get out of it? Because I don't need to stay here forever. Life's too short. And
Yes.
there's got to be other opportunities out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's something else I was going to ask you about that. We'll come back. Okay, so we covered two of the archetypes I think you mentioned, Medusa
Yes.
and the micromanager. I forget what you called it.
Oh, the chopper.
The chopper, yes, which people are all too familiar with.
Yes,
So
everyone.
I've been running leadership
Yes.
development workshops for years. One of the things I like to do is start by asking people to think of the best boss they've ever worked for, who really wasn't just a friend, but someone who really got the best, efforts out of them, and the worst boss they've
Sure.
ever worked for. And then tell me, like, what are the things that they did?
Oh, I love that.
And I'll write them down in the flip chart, something like that. And when I ask people about the worst boss, the most common thing that comes up over and over again is micromanager,
Yes.
right? Everybody
Yes.
hates working for a micromanager. And yet so many managers still do it, because my theory on it is this: there's a lot of fear behind, well, what if this is not done
Yes.
right? then it's going to reflect poorly on me and we're all going to lose our jobs, instead of enabling or empowering someone else to be successful. Have you found any other, what's the word I'm looking for? You found any other reasons behind that? What's driving so much micromanaging, which is just driving so many people crazy?
I think a few. I think one, we talked about loss of control. Certainly, you saw the helicopter manager rise in the pandemic. There's no control that you can feel at home or in the greater world. Let me go control people. The boss who it's like I had this boss who wanted to get in touch. He would email, he would call, he would Slack, he would DM, and then to be like a FaceTime audio within an hour. You're like, I'm in a meeting, right? Like, I will get back to you, whatever this is. But that need for control and monitoring what people are doing, I think that's one. I also think, and Andy, I've been a notorious micromanager, and this is a habit I look out for in myself. I find the going from doing to directing, and I know you're coaching so many individuals at companies, is that so many of us are not taught what to do when you go from doing to directing. That first time that you become a leader, is that my job is not to redo your work or to do your work. My job is to coach you on how to do your work. My job is to coach you through mistakes. My job is to teach you, right? And so many of us were never taught that. It's really interesting. I think about the first time I reported a team, it was probably, I know it was a circus. It was terrible, but no one actually taught me any of these things. Like, I didn't have that support, right? And so too many of us fail up. We fail up, meaning we are really good at this one thing and individual expertise. And then it's like, congratulations, Mita, you're so good at this. Now you have this big title and you have 10 people to oversee. I'm like, I never asked for 10 people to oversee what? And no one taught me.
And one of the mandates of that, when you get, that's one of the biggest challenges in talent development is, right, ICs, individual contributors, getting promoted for being excellent at their job and saying, okay, now tell other people how to do this. There's almost an implicit level of micromanagement in that. They're like, you were really good at doing this thing. Now go teach other people how to do it.
Yes.
Which means you feel pressure to show them exactly how to do it, instead of, teaching them and letting them do things their way. So you can see how a lot of people can end up in that place.
And I would also say, just in my own experience as a woman of color and some of the challenges I faced in the workplace, we can have high standards for ourselves. What's the margin of error for me getting things wrong? So does that mean I become more of a micromanager? I have less trust in people. I'm worried, as you said earlier, about how that might reflect on me and my leadership style. And so those are also things that I've seen come up as to reasons why people might micromanage closely.
So let's talk about some of the other archetypes. We've been through 2. What are some of the archetypes that we can look out for?
So we'll do a different one, which is the napper. And it's exactly what you think. This is the boss who fell asleep in every meeting, small or big. And so you think, this is really funny. And actually, my mother, who I talk to every day, remembers this and said to me, you forgot to include this detail, right? So like, my mom has all the receipts, and I've also changed like the names and places, because I really don't want to shame people. I want us to learn from why this person constantly fell asleep in meetings. And so at some point, Andy, when I'm working for this person, I start to think, is he narcoleptic? Does he have a substance abuse problem? Is he sleeping on the couch? Does he has a fight with his partner? Does he have young children? Like, what is going on? And then I'll never forget the day that he's sitting in the cubicle next to me and he's taking a call from a recruiter. And I hear what he makes for salary. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is like twice as much as I make. And he does nothing. And so this is a story about disengagement. And it's the famous quote of, the worst behavior we tolerate defines our culture. And so years later, I'm like, why was he allowed to consistently just be so disengaged? Yes, it was the falling asleep, but it was also the loudly, boldly being like, I hate it here. It sucks. Coming and going as he pleased. And that is really contagious, disengagement. And I wish more of us had the courage in our workplaces to confront it. And I include a quote from Professor Michael Murphy of Harvard University. And he asks a really powerful question, which is around, what would it take for you to be happy and engaged at work again? Like, imagine if we asked people that when they were spiraling. And a good leader I worked for years ago, I had someone on my team who was struggling with their performance. And he said, Mita, you need to take him out, either for coffee or lunch, outside of a regular scheduled day, and just ask him, like, let's be a recorder, a video recorder. Don't go into the emotions. Just say, here are the things I've observed. What would it take for you to be happy again at work? What would it take for you to be engaged? And there's going to be a few things that happen. One, the balloon's going to pop and the person's going to be like, wow, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. This is how I've been feeling. You're going to be able to help them or not. And if you can help them, you can probably coach them and get them to a better place. Number 2, you're going to decide together that, listen, you're meant to do great things, just not on my team here right now. And you're going to help them move on. Or number 3, they're just going to not reveal anything. They may have just be in such a bad place that they don't want to talk about it, in which case you likely will have to get HR involved and help them move on. But
Yep.
imagine if we had the courage to do that and that we could help people move on more quickly.
It would be amazing, right? And it starts with
Yes.
having that conversation, leading with curiosity, asking like, hey, what's going on? This is the things I've observed. What do you think we can do to change this so that we can improve your performance? You can be happier at work. So the napper is kind of interesting. I almost want to give him the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe these were really boring meetings that he didn't need to be at, but it sounds like he wasn't really contributing in a lot of other meaningful ways.
I mean, there was meetings he wasn't going to. I'll never forget. He was in a meeting with our vice president. He fell asleep. She shouted his name to get him to wake up and was really annoyed. And I was like, what is going? And it's the worst kept secret, right? Everybody in the office was talking about it.
Right.
And you're like, but why doesn't anyone have the courage to just tell him, like, go and have this conversation with him?
Right.
And the backstory, his backstory was he was on track to get promoted. He was once very engaged and there was a lot of changes. A new VP came in and he felt slighted, was passed over for promotion. So there's always a backstory. And that's when I talk about the empathy, like, why did this person become this way? And I'm sure he has the potential, and I'm sure he is today a good leader, but sometimes
he decided one day, I don't care about this place anymore because I didn't get the thing that I wanted. But that doesn't serve everyone else very well because everyone's watching him. It affects the culture around him.
Exactly.
Let's try one more. Like what's another archetype for us to look out for?
Another one, my husband's favorite is Tony Soprano. Pretty good nickname, I think. I hope you've all watched The Sopranos. If not, go ahead. But with one phone call, he could kill your career. And the point of Tony Soprano and this archetype is that he was the talent hoarder. He wouldn't let people go. And so I remember being wined and dined and being brought onto his team for a special one-year assignment. I was like, you do this one-year assignment, then you're going to go back to run a business. And I was like, great. And of course, as the 1 year is coming up, it's a very large company. Like most of us, you would start networking and thinking about, okay, let me go talk to some leaders and thinking about what I might do next. And he found out I was doing this, Andy, and lost his mind. He was like, you don't leave until I tell you to leave. You have to stay another 2 years. Why are you going behind my back talking to other people about opportunities here? It was wild. But again, you might say exacerbated archetype, but this goes back to this idea of talent hoarding. And too often we see HR talent leaders really help with succession planning and try to have processes in place. And then Mita just decides, well, Andy needs to stay another year. He needs to stay another year because he hasn't quite finished what he was doing, and I can teach him and coach him. And sometimes we don't do what's in the best interest of the other person. We do what's in the best interest of ourselves.
Right.
Because there's gaps. This project needs help. We just can't lose Andy. And sometimes the person becomes like, Andy becomes so indispensable. He's so good at what he does that he's actually making me shine, and I don't want him to move.
I don't want to lose that. Right.
I don't want to lose that. And then what ends up happening? You're going to leave. Because at some point, if I keep keeping you and stopping you from other opportunities in the organization, you're going to walk out the door.
Yeah.
And so the question is, when you love people, you let them go, right? So it's like you let them go because either
100%.
they're going to come back to you in another capacity, or you might work for them in another organization. And I see that the talent hoarding and this idea, I would say, of loyalty is just broken in our workplaces, right? And so loyalty is broken. The employer-employee social contract is broken. Yet too many leaders expect loyalty at all costs, and that's just not the world we're working in anymore.
Yeah, the talent hoarder, which we, of course, we get from Liz Weissman's first book, Multipliers, and years ago, she coined that phrase. It is pervasive still, and that's absolutely, people don't want to lose their best people. They don't want to deal with the challenges. They like having that person there. But I always like to ask leaders, like, what if you found out that your manager was holding you back because they needed you there? You'd be angry about that. You'd be so frustrated, right? So why would you do that to anyone else? I know it's going to be hard, but if you are constantly promoting people, helping people grow in their careers, you're going to build a reputation, if not even a legacy, of someone who was growing talent.
Amazing.
More people want to work for you.
And you're going to attract talent. You're going to attract talent where you go. You see executives who are brought in to turn around a business at a different company. And it's really interesting, the ones that very quickly rebuild a team. Sometimes they have to, move on from people who are there internally. But it's because, to your point, they have a reputation that precedes them of building great teams and great talent, and people want to work for them.
Yeah. So our listeners primarily work in talent development, learning and development, HR. We're preaching a little bit to the choir on this last one. They know some of these things, right? We all know this stuff, but they've also seen some of those bad bosses, some of these archetypes you're talking about that are still hanging around the business. They get people maybe coming to them and saying, hey, we need to put a training together because we've got some people, and it's
Yes.
usually one or two leaders, right? Something's going on with this team. It's not performing very well. And it turns out it is this leader. What can we in HR, especially in learning and development, talent development, do to help with this situation when we do identify that, a boss is acting like one of these bad bosses, whether they're emailing at midnight or doing something else that is causing stress on the team?
I think if it's obviously an extreme situation where there's smoke, there's fire,
Mhm.
to continue to influence, particularly the CEO, the founder, whoever's the final decision maker, that, how many people are you going to have walk out under Mita? What got you here as a company is not going to get you there, and Mita's not the person. And I see this too often, particularly in tech and companies that are growing and scaling, that we just don't want to let go of people because we have personal relationships with them, and we're willing to discount all of the feedback. And this is where it really, God, I really get annoyed. I mean, HR gets the blame for a lot of this, right? Because they're the ones who are, leading investigations and doing things. But at the end of the day, it's often not HR's decision, right? It's that CEO, the founder, who's deciding whether or not this person, particularly at an executive level. So influencing, showing documentation, that's the best we can do. But I also think trying to also say, like, hey, if we helped Mita move on and she left and got therapy and actually helped her land another role, maybe she can come back to us another day. Like,
Mhm.
let's help her set her up for success. If you've known her for 10 years, I get it. Like,
Yep.
let's do this for her. And I think that also helps as well. Like, what's the story? How do you construct the plan? What's the succession plan in place? And then, when appropriate, coaching, right? We talked about, I think there's a difference between coaching and therapy, but
Mhm.
there are a number of people who are really successful when they're given a coach. Obviously, that's why coaching works. And so when you
Yeah.
can do that, I mean, listen, people go from bad boss to good leader, bad boss to good leader, and they're extremes, right? So if this person is exhibiting some behavior that is blocking their team from doing their great work, and if they're
Mhm.
open to it, coaching is a fantastic way to help them course correct their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to recognize it. In a lot of situations, it may be a situation where we need to document and eventually
Sure.
help that person move on to something else. But there could be an opportunity for coaching or some other, really drawing a blank on words today. Some other way to help them improve or
Sure.
recognize, because a lot of times, like if we go back to the beginning of this conversation, and we agreed, most bosses don't show up intent on being a bad boss.
They don't.
And so a
Yeah.
lot of it is about self-awareness, right? They have no idea how these things are being
Sure.
received because no one's given them the feedback.
Absolutely. And I think, listen, the devil emails at midnight, that this book is not for the worst of the worst, the baddest of the bad bosses, the people who've been in the headlines or seeking redemption elsewhere. They're
Yeah.
not reading this book. It's for the rest of us who,
Yeah.
I would argue, Andy, most of us know when we're behaving badly. Like,
Yeah.
if we were to sit with ourselves in quiet, pause and reflect,
Yes.
I don't like how I showed up when I talked to Andy
Right.
today. I don't like how I showed up in the meeting. Like, most of us, if we sit with ourselves, we can
Yeah.
identify that.
Like if you're at a Coldplay concert and the camera turns on you and you have to duck, you're probably not doing the right thing, right?
Wow. Yes. Whew.
Sorry, just had to go
Yikes.
there.
Yikes. Yeah, you're
Talk
right.
about
Whew.
talk about bad bosses, or at least situations that are create make things uncomfortable at work.
Yes. Yeah.
And but like you said, you probably know if you sit and think about it that what you're doing is maybe not right.
It's actually a great
Um,
example, the
yeah,
ducking. You're doing it because right? You
yeah.
knew
If
something
you
was
would
wrong.
hide, you
Yeah,
don't want people to know
absolutely.
about it.
Yes. Yes.
But also at the same time, I think, going back to the self-awareness piece, a lot of people are lacking that or don't get enough of the feedback, and maybe they don't realize what they're doing to people on their team. So for, like you said, this is not necessarily for the worst of the worst,
Yeah.
but for anyone who's a manager, a leader who reads your book, is listening to this and thinking like, there probably are some things that I do because I haven't really stopped to think about how I'm impacting my team. How do you advise leaders to build more self-awareness around this and think about how they're approaching things so that they can become a better leader as well?
So as we talked about, we both love journaling. I love career journaling. I love documenting things, particularly from a career perspective, things that are working, things that aren't, things that I'm struggling with. So if you can develop that self-awareness and you think about one or two things you want to work on, then I would say reach out and ask for that coaching from someone on your team. So I used to have a boss who would say, it was funny, at the end of my performance review, what do you think I should start, stop, and continue doing? How do you think I'm doing as a boss? And I'll never forget one time I gave the feedback and he lost it right? He was like so
Ooh,
defensive. He's like, that's not true. And then I was like, I'm never giving him feedback again, right? Every time it was like, yeah,
right.
just keep doing what you're doing, right? You're just like, I'm not
Obviously,
going
you
to
were going through the motions. You didn't actually want it unless it
yeah,
was
you didn't
just,
want
you're
it.
amazing.
Right. So like that question is so open-ended and just can be fraught with a lot of anxiety, particularly for the more junior person in the relationship being asked.
Mhm.
So what I like to do is if you and I were having coffee on Friday, Andy, I would write you a note and say, Andy, looking forward to coffee and talking about some of the projects. I wanted to let you know in terms of my own development, here's one of the things I'm working on. I'm trying to delegate projects more quickly. And I also want to be teaching rather than fixing the team's mistakes. I'd love your coaching on that, would love to talk to you live about it. So there's a few things I've done here. One, I haven't used the word feedback, which can be really like
Mm.
right or wrong, black
Triggering,
or
maybe.
white, triggering. Yes, exactly. Two, I have put it in writing. So I give you time to process it, particularly I'm not putting you on the spot if you report into me. And then number three, I've been vulnerable. Like how many of us, I don't have many bosses who have ever said to me, here's the thing I'm working on. Help me. Because then when we have coffee, you're going to say, thanks for inviting me to do this. And actually, I don't think those are the two things you're working on. I'd like to offer a third. And I'm
Mm.
going to say, thanks so much for that. I'm processing it. I'm going to come back to you and think about the plan on how I might address this. And I'll also say context situation matters. I've received a lot of feedback in my career that I don't think is fair. And so you
Mhm.
have to think about like, what do you want to action to be better and do better?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else for those of us, especially in talent development, learning development, HR, who are on the lookout for these situations? And obviously, one of our missions, if we will, is to help people, especially leaders and managers, get better at what they're doing, become
Yeah,
better leaders. In fact, every learning development person I talk to in every company is working on some version of a new leadership development
sure.
program. So, what else should we be thinking about? Anything else from the book that would be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway for this audience is to think about how you can be a mirror for those
Mm.
leaders that you work with. And so if I'm working with Andy and I see him like, not that Andy would do this, but lose his mind in a meeting, I'll say, Andy, I saw you get really red in the face and
Yeah.
you dropped an F bomb and you seemed really agitated based on your nonverbals. Can I help? What's going on here? And sometimes it takes that moment to be a mirror. You're like,
Mm.
oh my God, I did do that. And I'm really sorry I behaved that way. And
Yeah.
actually, I'm dealing with a sick relative or my nanny called out sick or whatever it may be. Because oftentimes the things that we're reacting to at work aren't about work. They're about something else that's happening that's in our mind and that we're lashing out that way. So anytime you can be a mirror for someone and just check in with kindness and ask open-ended questions, people react to that more positively than we think.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's a great way to go and a great thing to finish on. Mita, this has been great. For
Yeah.
anybody who is listening, who wants to reach out to you to get in touch, to learn more about what you're doing, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, first, I hope everyone checks out the book, The Devil Emails at Midnight, What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble is your local independent bookstore. You can find me on LinkedIn. I love meeting new people. Send me a DM and mitamallick.com. Thanks, Andy. I really loved our
Mita,
conversation.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. Always love talking with you. The book, again, is The Devil Emails at Midnight, What Good Leaders Can Learn from Bad Bosses, available everywhere. Mita, thanks again. Always love talking with you. And I look forward to talking with you more soon.
Thanks so much.